The Chicago Bulls, short of DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine, managed to beat a fully healthy Milwaukee Bucks team, and I'm a little bit less surprised by it than I think most would be. Hello everybody, welcome to Osrosi Buckets. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference and the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. So obviously when I say that I'm not surprised, I don't mean that I expect this roster without those two to be a team that can regularly compete with the Milwaukee Bucks. Obviously, there is a degree of surprise that they played as well as they did. However, the fact that the Bulls as a whole looked much better than they have in, well, I guess this entire season, it doesn't surprise me because I truly believe that Zach and DeMar as a duo are a net negative on this team, and just in general, those two together would be a net negative in most contexts. I'll elaborate on that a little bit further, but first let's just delve into the actual stuff that happened in this game because it can kind of lay the groundwork for what I'm talking about. So the first thing that stands out about how the Bulls played here, other than individual performances, is how many assists they got. On the season, the Bulls average 22 assists per game. They got 32 in this one. They did obviously play in overtime, but I don't know that it made that much of a difference. I don't think it was a very high scoring overtime. And the ball was moving very well. The other thing was pace. The Chicago Bulls are currently tied for the worst pace in the entire NBA. In this game, the ball was getting up the floor in transition regularly, whether it was Kobe White or Ayo Dosunmu, who especially was pushing it up the floor quite a bit. And just in general, this team played with more modern basketball principles in mind. Playmaking from a team perspective, they got up three-pointers fairly well, although the Bulls have been better at getting up three-pointers this year. They had an even higher volume of ones in this one, or a higher volume of threes in this one. Again, the pace made a world of difference. There were so many easy buckets for the Bulls in this one, rather than every possession delving into a half-court set where we're ultimately ending up getting a pull-up mid-range shot, which is the least efficient shot in the NBA by a significant margin. So, as for some individual performances, Nikola Vucevic was awesome in this one, which isn't necessarily a surprise just because he immediately becomes the most skilled scorer in the Bulls starting lineup. But Kobe White was also massive in this one. While his efficiency definitely could have been better, he was definitely throwing up some shots that were questionable. He also hit some very big shots, even some of them that were questionable did actually go in. Good job passing the ball as well, and as I mentioned, him and Ayo did a very, very good job of maintaining the pace, advancing the ball, and taking care of easy opportunities. Alex Caruso was obviously huge in this one. He hit the game-tying three to send it into overtime. He did have 7 turnovers, and as a whole, this was a kind of turnover-heavy game from the Bulls, for sure. Definitely some sloppy basketball both ways here. On the end for Milwaukee, Damian Lillard had a pretty bad game, and that's probably ultimately what cost them here. But otherwise, I think they played a pretty respectable game. Malik Beasley shot the ball a few too many times. Malik Beasley should not be leading your team in shots, that's for sure. But, you know, Giannis had a typical Giannis game, 26, 14, 5, and 5 blocks. Chris Middleton also wasn't very good, but that's nothing new for this season. He had 5 points in the first minute of the game and then kind of sucked for the rest of it. But the guy who stood out the most for Milwaukee on the positive end of things was definitely Brook Lopez. He went 6 for 10 from 3, hit a couple of clutch threes, hit a couple of really deep threes. The guy was just going off from outside in this one. 6 for 10 overall, if I didn't say that already. Very, very solid overall performance from the Milwaukee Bucks, and yet the Chicago Bulls still managed to win this one just purely off of actually playing like a basketball team in 2023. And I don't think neither Zach LaVine nor DeMar DeRozan's skill sets jive very well with modern basketball principles. Big thing that I always talk about that has become more and more prevalent in the NBA is being a scorer and a playmaker, and being just one of the two, not really being an acceptable archetype in the NBA anymore. You have Zach LaVine, who's not going to be playmaking, and you have DeMar, who is a much better playmaker than Zach LaVine, but also his game is entirely predicated on mid-range shooting. Now, obviously, as I've said 1,000 times over, unless you're new and you don't know this whole thing already, I love a good mid-range shot. It's like literally my favorite thing in basketball as a whole. Like, I grew up being a huge Kobe Bryant fan. That's just, mid-range shooting is my shit. However, it is just objective fact that having mid-range shots be the main shot you are getting on any given possession is terrible for a modern NBA offense. The Bulls have been bottom of the league in three-point attempts, free throw line attempts, so getting to the rim, and just overall paint attempts. You are not going to be a top team in the NBA if you can't do any of those things well. In this game, the Bulls got to the rim incredibly well. Other than Javon Carter, really nobody was shooting mid-range shots pretty much at all. And they, like I said, modern fucking principles. And DeMar DeRozan gets in the way of that by constantly putting up mid-range shots, and that really being the only option. Like, he can drive decently, but it's not something that he does nearly as regularly as he pulls up. Three balls, obviously a non-threat. And then Zach LaVine doesn't fit into modern basketball principles either because of that lack of playmaking. And I understand why you would look at those guys who are obviously recent all-stars and clearly have talent, and say, how can you say those guys are causing you to lose? But if you're built around skill sets that just do not jive with the modern NBA, it doesn't matter how good you are at those skill sets. The problem is that you're applying those skill sets as your foundational things. You know, like Zach LaVine could be on another team, and, you know, different contexts around them can ultimately result in him still being a positive player. And same thing for DeMar DeRozan, although I do have my doubts for DeRozan specifically just because of the fact that he's such a prevalent mid-range shooter. And I don't think that skill set is very good for a first option, but I don't think it's very good for a second or third one either, because you especially want a second and especially third option to be somebody that can space the floor, or if they're not spacing the floor, at least doing like big man shit, which he's obviously not doing. So I do not know where DeMar DeRozan's place in the NBA is with the skill set that he has right now. Zach LaVine, I can see it a little bit easier just because you can ultimately treat him like a shooter who can attack off of the catch. How much he's willing to play that exact role, who knows? But you know, you have pure offensive and pure scoring players who can fit in the very right context. But I do genuinely believe that these two are one of the worst duos in the history of the NBA, and I'm not exaggerating. They have just terrible net rating when they're playing together. Those two and Vucevic have always had a negative net rating. I imagine it was positive when Lonzo Ball was there, but guess what? Lonzo Ball's not here anymore. And Nikola Vucevic is also probably the one that I blame the least of those three, because I do think he's the one who's easily the most shafted by the context of those two being there. He had a great game in this one, you know, 29 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists. I might have forgotten to highlight that, but he was huge in this one. That's because he was actually being looked for in the offense and actually was utilized correctly rather than just someone who's going to set screens for DeMar and Zach. Love this game. Everybody really just had a great performance. Io and Patrick were also really, really good. And I think this can be a glimpse into the future of what the Bulls would look like post Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. Alex Caruso would also be gone in that context, and he was obviously a big part of this one. But I would not be surprised if, of all of the vets the Bulls have, that Vucevic would be the one that they keep, just to have that like stabilizing force and a big man for a young guard for your young guards. Hopefully you get better young guards than what you currently have, but still, you know, Kobe and Io are definitely worth developing. So yeah, this seems like a glimpse into the future. And honestly, while I don't expect the Bulls to be much better without DeMar and Zach, I honestly would not be surprised if, in terms of win percentage, we really did not see much of a difference. Luckily, that still means a top draft pick because their win percentage has been dog shit this year. But yeah, that's it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.